This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
A science story, huh?
These NYU scientists,
I felt
right.
I was so
And I just thought, well,
I had figured it out.
it was that golden moment.
Because science was on my side.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Story Clatter, where true personal stories about science help us to discover how weird, complicated, and deeply human this world can be. I'm your host, Misha Gajewski, and in today's episode, both of our stories highlight the unconventional path of becoming a science journalist. And as a former science journalist myself, I don't think I've met anyone who got into science journalism in a traditional way. I ended up in science journalism because I hated my business degree. Anyway, I can't wait for you to hear these stories, so let's jump in. Our first story is from independent health reporter and author of the newsletter Landmansplained, Keren Landman. Her story is recorded in Atlanta way back in 2023. Here's Keren.
People will try to tell you who you are. Sometimes it's a trap. Other times it's a trap door. Let me tell you what I mean. In August of 2010, at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, in the second month of the first year of my infectious disease fellowship, I was sitting in a Pete's Coffee in Boston, Massachusetts, waiting for somebody to arrive. I was in such a state that when he walked in the place, I looked up and saw the first sun of the morning coming in the window behind him and thought, I am literally in a tunnel and he is the light at the end of it. And then I laughed at myself for being such a mawkish fucknut. But he sat down and took the notebook that was in front of me. Now, he was there to talk to me about being a global HIV researcher because he was a very famous global HIV researcher. This is something I wanted very badly. In the notebook that he took from me, he made a drawing, and it looked like this. It was a deep V, something shaped kind of like a dagger. And above the point of it, he made a little notch, and he asked me, how many scientific papers have you published? And I said, 6. And he wrote 5, just rounded me down, and said, this is you. He made another notch a little bit further up and wrote a 20 next to it. And he said, when you publish 20 papers, you could be an assistant professor. And another notch a little further up wrote a 50. Here you can be an associate professor. And 100 plus at the top, that's full professor. Now this man was a full professor. I mean, he was well more than a full professor. He was some kind of an endowed chair, had published hundreds of papers. I thought back to a story I read as a kid in a set of cloth-bound books from the 1950s that my mom had bought at a garage sale. I think maybe a Polish folk tale or something about a princess who climbs a mountain made of glass for 3 days to find her prince. And I imagined myself scaling the glass walls of that V with no footholds, no tufts of grass to hold onto, and nothing at any waypoint but more glass. And I thought to myself as I walked out of that coffee shop, no, thank you. I didn't want to be anywhere near that V. See, I did not want to be a doctor growing up. I wanted to be a writer. I mean, in my free time, I would write and illustrate stories for people. I tried to write my first novel when I was 9. It did not work out. But everybody knew that writing was my thing. But it was not an appropriate profession, according to my family. And, as I got older and went to college, I realized that the writers that I liked and valued and that my family valued, they were people who knew something. They were experts in something. And who was I? I was a schnook. I had nothing important to say. So I went to medical school instead. I kept writing. In fact, the first time I ever realized I had some power as a writer was in medical school. It was between my third and fourth years of med school. I moved to Tanzania for the year and did global HIV research with a group that was working there. We stayed in this doctor's compound next to the hospital, and on evenings and weekends, I would sit under the tall mango trees in our yard and write. And I would post what I wrote to what we called a blog back then. And people would read it. There's one story that got a particularly strong response from people. It was about this woman named Husna, who I met really early in my time in Tanzania. She brought her little twin babies to the pediatric HIV clinic because they were starving to death. She had end-stage HIV. She had AIDS. She was very malnourished. She had no more breast milk left, and she was trying to get them to take this sort of weak, milky tea out of a cup, and they weren't. This was a pivotal time for Tanzania. Shortly after I arrived, the first in a thin trickle of HIV medications started coming into the country, and Husna was one of the people who got them. And 5 months later, she came back to my office to show me the dimples in her little baby's fat cheeks and how she was filling out a dress. And I realized I am the person to tell these stories. People read them, but I was there seeing it, and I could write them. There was power to that. For residency, I matched in the same shitty Rust Belt town where I went to medical school, and I was very, very, very upset about it. And to console myself, I made a deal with myself that since I couldn't be spending my free time having the fun I would have had in a Chicago or a Seattle or New York City, I would at least do something else valuable with that time. I would write. And so I did. I started another blog, first day of my intern year, before I'd even washed the creases out of my white coat. And now I had material. Being in a hospital 80 hours a week for 4 years in your 30s will change you. It changed me. And I wrote all about it. People noticed. An editor noticed and asked if I had any interest in writing a book. And I submitted a manuscript, final draft, 2 months before I graduated. I knew well before then that the hospital was not for me. I wanted to somehow recapture some of that magic I'd had in Tanzania. And the natural path to that was an infectious disease fellowship and a research path. So that's what landed me in Boston. But a week after I arrived, I got a call from that editor, and he said, book project's off. It's nothing personal. This was the height of the subprime mortgage crisis. Passion projects were dying left and right. Mine was just one of them. And when he told me these news, I was standing on this glass footbridge between these two hospitals that had only just begun relentlessly abusing me. And there was nothing in front of my face beyond the glass but air. And I remember feeling suddenly like there was also nothing beneath my feet, and I was just plummeting. I tried to write about what I was going through, and I couldn't find words. I just lost my voice. And then that meeting in the coffee shop happened a few weeks later, and then I was adrift. See, I had spent 4 years nourishing these two separate identities. I was never just a doctor. I was also a writer. And these things nourished each other. They were two halves of a whole, and now they were just gone, just crumbling between my fingers like dust. I survived that year, and then I survived the slightly less awful one that followed, and then a few more after that. And then in 2015, I got a job working on public health in New York City. And I liked it. I had a great boss. I had wonderful colleagues. They valued my work. It was meaningful. That summer, we had an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in the Bronx. It's a really big one. Legionnaire's disease is a pneumonia that you get through contaminated mist particles of water in the air. And this one had been caused by contaminated water coming off of a cooling tower on the top of a big hotel in the Bronx. A bunch of people had walked by it, inhaled the mist, got pneumonia, and died. And it was a big fucking deal. We did a lot of media. I did a lot of media because everybody in my division was out on summer vacation. I was sitting in a Bronx cable station, Channel 2, talking to a very smart reporter who was asking me really good questions when I thought, man, I wish I had her job. So I quit. And I started a journalism program, and I loved it. Here I was, all my life, just wanting to communicate important ideas in words, and suddenly I was surrounded by people whose whole reason for being was to do exactly that. I mean, I immersed myself in it. I went to journalism talks. I read about journalism. I listened to journalism podcasts. I was listening to a podcast about journalism when I heard the voice of Taffy Brodesser-Akner. She's a celebrity profile writer, and I don't care about celebrity profiles, but I did care about her voice. It was incredible. It struck me immediately. She was so smart. She was so funny, relatable, and compassionate and incisive. I was boarding this flight to LA, and I downloaded a few of her stories. Before we landed, I was her #1 fan. She'd also done something that felt very relatable to me. She had pivoted from a different kind of desperation to writing mid-career. I knew that story. Freelancing was tough. I should have been at this point in my career taking off, and here I was starting on the ground floor. Kept reading Taffy. She kept inspiring me. I kept muddling through. In 2019, I saw that she was teaching a writer's workshop. I couldn't sign up fast enough, booked my ticket. It was a weekend workshop, and we spent most of Saturday picking apart stories that we'd read that she had assigned us and talking about our own ideas. And then she spent a little time talking about how she does things. She started talking about voice, and I immediately felt the hairs on the back of my neck come up. Somebody else in the room asked, "What do you do when you've lost your voice?" And my eyes filled up. She said, "Well, you don't go looking for it because voices, like people, change and grow. And if you're busy looking for an old voice, you're denying a new one that inevitably, guaranteed, is more profound than that old voice." By now, I was fully sobbing with the utmost gentleness she and everybody else in that room just let me. Then she started talking about structure. And here she took out a piece of paper and drew something on it, and she held it up to us, and it was a deep V. But it was upside down, and it was tilted just a little bit to the right. She pointed to the part of the line where it takes off from the bottom of the page. She looked at us and she said, "This is you, starting to tell a story." And then she pointed at the peak and she said, "This is the thing you knew all along going into this story that you are just now sharing with a reader. This is where the story turns because you specifically turned it. This is a crisis point. And after this is where we show the reader, because we care for them, that even despite a crisis, we soldier on." I cried straight through that. I cried straight through the rest of the day. I cried through the dinner I had with the people from the workshop afterward. And then I couldn't sleep all night. I stayed up writing. I wrote what eventually became this. I did not know then that within a year, all of my experience would suddenly become tragically extremely relevant. I also didn't know that 3 years later, when I got my first full-time journalism job, it would fit like a glove. And I would wonder what had taken me so fucking long. What I did know was how different that shape looked, depending on which way it was pointing. In the wrong hands, that deep V was a prison. And in the right hands, it was a ramp. Like, you know, the kind that kids in a skateboard park will just fly off over their hands outstretched, reaching for the sun. Like they don't even have bones in their body to break, just totally free. Maybe I could jump off that ramp too. Maybe I could reach for the sky too. In the wrong hands, that shape was a trap. But in the right hands, it was a story. And it was mine. Thank you.
Nothing feels better than landing in the place you were always meant to be. Anyway, that was Keren. If you'd like to learn more about her, head over to our website, storyclatter.org. Not everyone wants to step up to the mic, and that's cool. There's another way to be part of the Story Clatter, by supporting us as a donor. Right now, more than ever, we need spaces where scientists and science communicators can share their voices. Personal stories cut through the noise. They make science human, relatable, and real, but bringing those stories to life takes resources. That's where our donors come in. They help us produce the podcast, amplify the voices that might otherwise go unheard, and create moments that stay with you long after the episode ends. If that matters to you, you can support us at storyclatter.org/donate. Most people give about $10 a month, but every tax-deductible contribution, no matter the size, helps keep the stories coming, so thank you for being part of it. So, I've realized that preparing for a baby is basically an exercise in asking yourself, can I make this part of my life just a little bit easier? Because between getting the nursery ready, figuring out strollers, and accepting that sleep is about to become optional, I'm trying to simplify whatever I can. As a cat parent, one thing I didn't want to keep worrying about was the litter box. We've been using the Whisker litter robot for over a month now, and it's been such a nice upgrade. It automatically cycles after every use, so there's no daily scooping, which has been especially nice during pregnancy, since I'm not handling litter every day. One feature I've really come to appreciate is the Whisker app. It notifies me when the clean cycle is complete, lets me check the litter and drawer levels, and even tracks my cat's weight and bathroom usage. It's one less thing to keep in my head during a time when my brain already feels completely full. If you're getting ready to welcome a baby, or honestly, if you just want to spend less time scooping litter, Whisker has different litter robot models for households with 1 cat or up to 5, plus bundles that make getting started easy. Maintain your cat's litter while focusing on your growing family. Learn more about Whisker litter robot models and starter kits today to get set up before your new baby arrives. Take an additional $50 off bundles with code COLLIDER when you shop whisker.com/collider. That's an additional $50 off bundles with code COLLIDER at whisker.com/collider.
Summer routines live or die by how easy they are, and honestly, if something takes too much effort, I'm out. That's why Groons is my go-to. It's my one daily pack of gummies covering my greens, vitamins, and minerals. Plus, it has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, which is more than 2 cups of broccoli. No mixing powders, no giant pills, no hassle. I just rip open the pack and I'm done. They taste good and they make it easy to stay on top of my health, even when life gets busy. Save up to 52% with the code PODCAST at Groons.co. That's code PODCAST at GRUNS.co.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Our next story is from Adithi Ramakrishnan. She's a science reporter with the Associated Press. Her story was performed at a show we did in November 2023 in Dallas, Texas, in partnership with Dallas Morning News. Here's Adithi.
pushed open the door and stepped into my very first college lecture hall. 5-subject notebook in one hand and this bulky pencil case in the other, I shuffled into a seat comfortably in the middle row, avoiding making eye contact with the professor. I opened my notebook to a blank page and wrote down the course title in big capital letters: Intro to Biology. This was the year that I'd finally answered that elusive, mind-numbing question of what I was supposed to do with my life. It's one I'd been asking myself for a long time. My dad came to the United States from India when he was 9, and my mom joined him when they were married 15 years later. Both my parents are software engineers. The life they'd built afforded us stability, the ability to keep food on the table, provide for the family, buy me the princess dolls and science experiment kits that I wanted for Christmas. I wanted that same stability, the ability to make my family and future generations proud. In high school, I took this really intense science class where we had to read 60 pages of scientific research about the brain every single week. I had to Google what a word meant at least once a paragraph. But reading about how scientists were distilling these big, complicated emotions like love, fear, passion, down to these microscopic zaps of electricity inside the brain fascinated me. I knew the brain was what I wanted to learn more about. But once I finished my 4 years at school, I wasn't really sure what would come next. I looked behind me at the students filling in some of the back rows, whispering to each other about how many credits they'd signed up for. There I saw option 1, the pre-meds. I could become a doctor, lump 5 to 6 extra courses into my schedule, find time to study for the MCAT, take a bus 10 to 15 minutes off campus to volunteer, and apply to medical school. It seemed like most of the kids in the room were dying to do it, so it could be a natural fit for me. Then I thought back to the summer when I was watching an episode of Grey's Anatomy with my mom. I watched this doctor hold up this glinting silver needle against the patient's shoulder, about to jab it into this bulging red vein, and I yanked my hands up to cover my eyes and my nose scrunched up even though I knew it wasn't real. Ew. Okay, so medical school might not be the path for me. That left me with option 2. I looked in front of me at the students filling in the first 3 rows. A few of them were already out of their seats, introducing themselves to the professor and asking to join her research lab. My friends that didn't want to become doctors had instead elected to become researchers, making discoveries that change the way we see the world around us. I thought about my time reading those scientific research papers in high school and wondered what it would be like to be the one writing them. I had so many questions about how the brain worked. Answering them in a lab seemed like something that I'd want to do. Which is how I found myself bending over a microscope, holding a needle so thin I could only see it under the microscope lens, looking down at a tadpole. The research lab that I had joined was trying to answer the question of how humans learn to see. But before answering that question in humans, we were starting first with tadpoles. These wriggly little creatures with beady eyes, pointy tails, and covered in dots. They were so small that one could barely fit on my fingernail, though that would be nearly impossible considering how quickly they wiggled around in the plastic trays that we kept them in. The first time I put a tadpole under a microscope and looked at it, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I could see this tadpole's brain so clearly through its transparent head. It didn't look anything like our brain. It was long and narrow, like a little caterpillar running between its eyes to the very start of its tail. But I could see this triangle-shaped area called the optic tectum, where its brain cells were multiplying to teach its eyes to see. I was fascinated, and I had so many questions. How well could tadpoles see? How long until their brains developed? How fast could they swim? On day 4 in the lab, I finally learned how to run experiments. Gently, I scooped this little tadpole out from the plastic tray and into this little dish about the size of a bottle cap. Using a pipette, I squirted a few drops of anesthesia into the dish to put the tadpole to sleep. Then I put the tadpole under the microscope and I inserted this super thin needle into the triangle-shaped optic tectum, and I injected this blue liquid that contained DNA. The whole triangle filled up with blue. Then I put these 2 electrodes on either side of the tadpole's head and pushed this button to shock the tadpole with just enough electricity to get its brain cells to take in this DNA I just injected. I felt like the coolest person in the entire world. And I had even more questions. How well could tadpoles see? How long until their brain cells took in this DNA I injected? And why was it blue? On day 5, I injected the tadpoles again. Wow, still very cool. And then I injected them again on day 7 and day 10 and day 12 and day 15 and day 17 and day 20, day 30. I heard my phone alarm go off, and I threw the covers off my bed. Time to go inject some tadpoles. Again. I pushed open the door to lab, and I sat down on this swivel chair, looking down at the microscope. I watched all the tadpoles swimming around in their tray. I didn't want to be the person injecting them over and over again. But I still had so many questions about how their brains worked and how their brains were going to change as they grew up. I still thought that their wriggly little bodies and their caterpillar-shaped brains were so cool that I wanted to tell everyone I knew about them. Could I still ask questions about tadpoles even if I wasn't the one studying them? Could I be the person telling people about research instead of being the one doing it? I opened up my laptop and I typed in the question, how do tadpoles learn to see? Dozens of results popped up, including articles written by science reporters. Was there an option 3 for me? A future like that wasn't really part of the stable life that I'd envisioned for myself. I had no idea how to get started, and I didn't know anybody who was doing it. I didn't know how hard it would be, how stressful it would be, if I would even be good at it. But the more I thought about it, the more it was starting to feel like that was the thing that would make me happy. So I talked to my lab director and I took a step back from the tadpoles. I called science reporters at universities like Johns Hopkins and research labs like Howard Hughes to ask them how they got started and if they had any advice. And I wrote a lot. Most of it was pretty bad, but little by little, I got better. Now, I tell stories for a living. As a science reporter with the Dallas Morning News, I write about researchers who are exploring all of the nooks and crannies of science, just like my lab director. I've written about a researcher who discovered a molecule by accident that could treat one of the most aggressive forms of breast cancer. I've written about a student that developed a spoon to stabilize Parkinson's tremors so that his grandmother could enjoy their family dinners again. Because I used to work in a lab, I understand some of the complicated words that scientists use when they explain their work to me, like optic tectum or frontal lobe. Just like I did in high school, I read tons of scientific research papers, and I still Google all the words that I don't know. And because I'm a writer, I'm able to break down those words into terms that anybody can understand. And because I used to work in a lab, I know to ask scientists about more than just what they did and why it matters. I ask them how they feel, because I remember how I felt. Excited, confused, even bored. I bring out the emotions of the scientists that I write about because I want people to see them as more than just these mysterious silhouettes plugging away in a research lab. I want you to see them as people. 5 years since I first stepped into the research lab and saw a tadpole, I don't really have that stable life that I thought that I wanted. I don't know if I'll be able to support myself financially with this career or if the pace and the stress will burn me out too quickly. But a few months ago, I called up a doctor for a story that I was writing. I asked him all my questions, and I summarized everything I'd understood back to him, just to make sure that I understood everything properly. And he told me, "You put it much better than I did. What you guys do is really important and very cool as journalists. I thanked him, wrapped up the call, and got to working on my draft. Yeah, I think so too.
That was Adithi, and I'm so glad she's still making a career out of being a science journalist. The world could use more passionate science journalists out there. If you'd like to learn more about Adithi, visit our website, storyclatter.org. Our website is just one way to connect with Storyclatter, but there are so many other ways. You can always follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Head to storyclatter.org to become a financial supporter. If you're interested in coming to one of our live shows or starting a Storyclatter show in your own community, you can find the details on our website. You can also learn how to tell your own science story or send us your science story too. And if you like this podcast, tell a friend. Share an episode, introduce someone to Storyclatter, and help bring more people into the world of science storytelling. This podcast is produced by me, Misha Gajewski, along with Jen Chen, Nahisha Roberts-Washington, and Aaron Barker. The stories featured in today's episode were produced by Mesa Salaita, Kelly Vinyl, Hodo Amam, and Juan Carlos Martinez Jr. Special thanks goes out to the Storyclatter's board and team. Our theme music is by Ghost. And next week, we'll be back with a Best of Storyclatter episode from our archive. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. I don't know about you, but I always end up traveling a ton during the summer. But this year, I'm also pregnant, and it added a whole extra layer of, okay, but what if something goes wrong? That's why I really appreciated the recent episode of All the Hacks called Do You Actually Need Travel Insurance? If you haven't listened before, All the Hacks is hosted by Chris Hutchins, and it's all about finding smarter ways to improve your life, money, and travel. In this episode, Chris breaks down what travel insurance actually covers, when it's worth buying, when your credit card might already have you covered, and the situations where you definitely don't want to skip it. It's the kind of practical information that's easy to overlook until you really need it. And it gave me a lot more confidence heading into my next trip. Whether you're planning a summer vacation or just want to travel a little smarter, it's definitely worth a listen. So, search for All the Hacks. That's All the Hacks in your podcast app. Hit follow and start upgrading your life today.